In the affluent hills of Marin County, a 72-year-old widow was about to host what she believed would be a healing Christmas gathering. What started as an elaborate family celebration took a devastating turn when her daughter-in-law dismissed her as just decoration. Eleanor Hartwell wasn't your typical grieving widow. For decades, she had built a successful interior design empire while raising 3 children. When Madison's cruel comment shattered her illusions, Eleanor had no idea she was about to redecorate her entire $3.2 million will. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Hartwell stood in her living room doorway, surveying the scene with the critical eye of someone who had spent decades orchestrating perfection. The 12-foot noble fir dominated the corner near the bay windows, its branches heavy with 3 generations of ornaments. Handmade clay angels from when the children were small, delicate crystal snowflakes Robert had brought back from Austria, and newer additions that sparkled under the warm glow of LED lights. Garland draped every mantel, banister, and door frame, interwoven with burgundy velvet ribbon that matched the dining room's holiday table runner. At 72, Eleanor moved with less fluidity than she once had, her arthritis making itself known in the morning stiffness of her fingers as she'd arranged the last of the centerpieces. But muscle memory guided her through the familiar choreography of Christmas preparation, each placement deliberate and meaningful. The house smelled of cinnamon, pine, and the prime rib roast that had been slow cooking since dawn. This would be the 3rd Christmas without Robert, but Eleanor had convinced herself it would be different from the previous 2 years of awkward grief and stilted conversations. She'd thrown herself into the preparations with renewed vigor, determined to recreate the magic that had once made their Marin County home the heart of the holiday season. The caterer had delivered enough food for twice their number. The guest bedrooms were perfectly appointed with fresh linens and small gift baskets. She'd even hired a pianist to play carols softly in the background during cocktail hour. Everything had to be perfect. Perfect enough to heal the fractures that had appeared since Robert's death. Perfect enough to remind her family why they belonged together. The doorbell's first chime sent Eleanor's pulse quickening with anticipation. Through the frosted glass panels, she could see David's familiar silhouette, and behind him, the smaller figures of Madison and 8-year-old Lily. Eleanor smoothed her burgundy cashmere sweater, chosen to complement the room's decor, and opened the door with her warmest smile. "Merry Christmas!" she exclaimed, her arms already extended for embraces. David leaned down to kiss her cheek, his hug genuine but brief. "The house looks incredible, Mom. You've outdone yourself." Madison stepped forward with her phone already raised, angling for the perfect shot of the elaborate entryway display. "Oh my God, Eleanor, this is so extra," she said, her tone carrying that particular millennial inflection that could mean either admiration or mockery. The flash fired 3 times before Madison even acknowledged Eleanor's presence with a perfunctory air kiss. "My followers are going to die over this aesthetic." Lily broke free from the adult choreography and launched herself into Eleanor's arms with uninhibited joy. "Grandma, I missed you so much. Can we make cookies like you promised? And can I help with the presents under the tree? There are so many." Eleanor's heart swelled as she held her granddaughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. This was why she did all of it, for moments like these, when love felt uncomplicated and pure. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll make sugar cookies after dinner, and you can help me arrange all the gifts just perfectly." As they moved into the living room, Madison continued her documentation, repositioning ornaments for better lighting and staging shots that would showcase both the decor and her own carefully curated appearance. She wore a cream-colored designer sweater that Eleanor recognized as costing more than many people's monthly mortgage payments, a gift from David's last bonus, no doubt. "David, can you get a shot of me by the mantel? The lighting is perfect right here." Madison posed with practiced ease, one hand trailing along the garland while she gazed thoughtfully into the distance. "This will be perfect for my Christmas content series." Eleanor busied herself taking coats and offering drinks, trying not to notice how Madison treated her home like a backdrop rather than a gathering place. She'd grown accustomed to her daughter-in-law's social media habits over the 5 years of marriage, but something about watching her carefully curate their family moments for public consumption always left Eleanor feeling oddly hollow. The second arrival brought Sarah rushing through the door in her scrubs, still wearing her hospital badge, and carrying the faint antiseptic scent that clung to healthcare workers. Eleanor's daughter looked exhausted, her usually bright eyes shadowed with the kind of fatigue that came from too many double shifts and too little sleep. "I'm so sorry I'm late," Sarah said, embracing her mother with fierce affection. "We had a last-minute emergency in the PICU, and I couldn't leave until the replacement arrived. James is parking the car. The boys fell asleep in their car seats, so he's going to carry them in." Eleanor held her daughter's face between her hands, noting the stress lines that seemed deeper than they'd been at Thanksgiving. "You work too hard, sweetheart. The children are lucky to have you, but you need to take care of yourself too," says the woman who's been cooking for 3 days straight, Sarah replied with a tired smile. "Mom, the house looks absolutely magical. You've created a winter wonderland." Unlike Madison's performative enthusiasm, Sarah's appreciation felt genuine, warming Eleanor from the inside out. She watched as her daughter took in the details, the way the ribbon colors coordinated throughout the house, how each room told its own part of the Christmas story while contributing to the larger narrative of celebration and togetherness. James appeared in the doorway carrying their 2 young sons, both still drowsy from the car ride. Eleanor's heart squeezed at the sight of her grandsons, their small faces peaceful in sleep. At 5 and 3, they were at the perfect age for Christmas magic, old enough to understand the excitement, but young enough to believe in wonder. The final arrival came without fanfare, Marcus slipping through the door with his characteristic quiet presence. Eleanor's youngest child had always been the family's enigma, and his recent transformation from troubled addict to steadily employed carpenter still felt fragile to her. He carried a small wrapped package and wore a button-down shirt that Eleanor recognized as one of Robert's, altered to fit his slighter frame. "Hey, Mom," he said simply, his embrace lasting longer than David's had. "Place looks beautiful. Dad would have loved it." The mention of Robert hung in the air for a moment, not painful exactly, but present. Eleanor squeezed Marcus's hand, grateful for his ability to acknowledge their loss without making it the center of attention. As the family settled into the living room for their traditional Christmas Eve cocktail hour, Eleanor retreated to the kitchen to check on dinner preparations. The catered hors d'oeuvres were arranged on her finest serving platters, the wine was breathing, and everything proceeded according to her carefully orchestrated timeline. From the kitchen, she could hear the familiar sounds of her family, David trying to moderate between Madison's commentary and Sarah's gentle corrections, James offering practical observations about the children's schedule, Marcus engaging Lily in quiet conversation about her latest art project. It was the symphony she'd been conducting for decades, though the harmonies had grown more complex since Robert's death had removed his steady bass note from their music. But as Eleanor arranged canapes on silver trays, she found herself listening more carefully to the individual voices, noticing discordant notes she'd previously overlooked. Madison's laugh had an edge when she talked about other family members' choices. David's responses carried a tension that suggested conversations continued from home. Even Sarah's gentle nature couldn't completely mask her frustration with Madison's constant documentation of their private moments. "Eleanor, where did you put the good lighting?" Madison called from the living room. "I want to get some shots of Lily by the tree, but this angle is all wrong." Eleanor paused in her preparations, a small frown creasing her brow. Not Mom or Grandma Eleanor as Lily called her, but just Eleanor, as if she were the hired help rather than the woman who'd given Madison a place in this family, who'd welcomed her with open arms and an open heart. She shook off the observation and returned to her hostess duties, carrying the first tray of appetizers into the living room. The pianist had arrived and filled the air with gentle renditions of classic carols. Lily had settled on the floor with her art supplies, creating what appeared to be a family portrait, with everyone gathered around an enormous Christmas tree. "Grandma, look!" Lily held up her drawing, her face bright with pride. "It's all of us at Christmas, see? There's Mommy and Daddy and Aunt Sarah and Uncle James and the boys and Uncle Marcus. And there's you right in the middle like the Queen of Christmas." Eleanor knelt beside her granddaughter, studying the colorful drawing with genuine delight. In Lily's artistic vision, Eleanor stood at the center of the family group, wearing what appeared to be a crown made of Christmas lights, her arms outstretched, as if embracing everyone at once. "It's absolutely perfect, sweetheart," Eleanor said, meaning it completely. "You've captured exactly how Christmas should feel." But as she stood up, Eleanor caught Madison's expression. A slight eye roll, a barely suppressed smirk that suggested she found both the drawing and Eleanor's reaction to it somehow amusing. The look was gone in an instant, replaced by Madison's practiced smile, but Eleanor had seen it clearly enough to feel its sting. Dinner proceeded with its usual pleasant chaos, multiple conversations weaving together, children's laughter punctuating adult discussions, the comfortable ritual of a family that had shared thousands of meals together. Eleanor had assigned seats with her usual diplomatic care, placing herself at the head of the table where she could orchestrate the evening and ensure everyone felt included. The prime rib was perfectly cooked, the wine selection thoughtful, the side dishes crafted to accommodate everyone's preferences. Eleanor had even remembered to prepare Marcus's favorite roasted vegetables without butter, a small gesture that acknowledged his ongoing commitment to healthier choices. But as the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself observing, rather than simply experiencing the celebration. She noticed how Madison's phone remained within constant reach, how she photographed her plate before eating, how her participation in conversations seemed calculated for later social media content. She saw David's subtle efforts to redirect attention whenever Madison made comments that might offend, his practiced diplomacy smoothing over rough edges that perhaps shouldn't be smoothed. Most tellingly, she began to hear the casual dismissiveness in Madison's tone when speaking about anything that didn't directly relate to her own interests or image. Comments about Eleanor's decorating style being a bit much for modern tastes, observations about the meal being very traditional, delivered with a slight wrinkle of her nose, small criticisms wrapped in apparent concern about Eleanor overdoing things at her age. The breaking point came during dessert preparation, when Eleanor stepped into the butler's pantry to retrieve the Christmas pudding she'd spent weeks preparing. Through the slightly open door, she heard Madison's voice clearly, speaking to David in what she obviously believed was private conversation. "Your mother is getting a bit dramatic in her old age," Madison said, her tone carrying the particular authority she used when making pronouncements about other people's behavior. "All this fuss over Christmas dinner, it's excessive. Someone needs to help her understand that she doesn't need to prove anything anymore. She needs to know her place." Eleanor's hands stilled on the dessert tray, her heart hammering against her ribs as the words sank in. Know her place. As if Eleanor were an employee rather than the woman who'd built this home, raised this family, and created every tradition they were currently enjoying. She forced herself to remain still, listening for David's response, hoping for some defense of his mother's efforts and generosity. "You're probably right," came David's weak reply. "Maybe I should talk to her after the holidays. Suggest she simplify things next year." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. The careful architecture of her self-perception, as beloved matriarch, as generous heart of the family, as someone whose efforts were appreciated if not fully understood, crumbled with those casual words. When she emerged from the pantry carrying the flaming Christmas pudding, her smile was perfectly in place, her hostess manner unchanged. But something had crystallized in those hidden moments. a clarity that cut through decades of willful blindness. As the family applauded the dramatic dessert presentation and Lily clapped her hands in delight at the blue flames dancing across the pudding's surface, Eleanor looked around the table with new eyes. She saw the love, real and genuine, in Sarah's face, in Marcus's quiet appreciation, in Lily's unguarded joy, but she also saw the casual entitlement, the assumption that her efforts were simply expected rather than chosen, the subtle message that her role was to provide rather than to be valued. The evening concluded with its usual warmth, family members expressing gratitude for the beautiful celebration, children's voices raised in excitement about Santa's imminent arrival, promises of early morning gift exchanges, and lazy Christmas Day lounging. Eleanor accepted their thanks with her customary grace, hugged each departing family member with apparent contentment, and waved goodbye from her illuminated doorway like the picture of holiday satisfaction. But as she closed the door and stood alone in her perfectly decorated foyer, surrounded by the remnants of another successful family gathering, Eleanor finally allowed herself to acknowledge what she'd been refusing to see. She wasn't the Queen of Christmas, as Lily had lovingly depicted her. In Madison's eyes, and perhaps in the eyes of others who simply accepted her generosity without question, she was exactly what Madison would soon call her, just decoration. Beautiful, elaborate, carefully maintained, but ultimately existing only to enhance other people's experiences, rather than to have any value of her own. The house felt different around her now, not like a warm gathering place but like a stage set waiting to be struck. Eleanor moved through the rooms, turning off lights and straightening cushions, her movements automatic but her mind racing with a new and uncomfortable awareness. Tomorrow would bring Christmas morning, gift exchanges, and the continuation of traditions that suddenly felt more like performances than celebrations. But something had changed tonight, something that couldn't be unchanged by morning light or family laughter, or even the genuine love she knew existed alongside the casual disregard. Eleanor Hartwell, for the first time in her 72 years, was beginning to understand the difference between being cherished and being used. And that understanding, she sensed, was going to change everything. Eleanor woke on Christmas morning to the sound of her own heartbeat, unnaturally loud in the pre-dawn silence. The revelations of the previous evening had followed her into restless sleep, fragments of overheard conversations weaving through dreams, where she stood invisible at her own dining table, speaking to family members who looked through her as if she were made of glass. She lay still for several minutes, watching winter light filter through the plantation shutters Robert had installed during their first year in the house. The familiar bedroom felt different somehow, as if her new awareness had shifted the very molecules of air around her. Everything looked the same: the antique vanity where she'd sat every morning for 27 years, the reading chair where Robert used to review his business papers, the family photographs that chronicled decades of holidays and milestones. But Eleanor felt like a stranger observing someone else's life. By 7 o'clock she'd showered, dressed in her favorite Christmas morning outfit, a soft red wool dress that Robert had always complimented, and begun preparing the traditional holiday breakfast. The kitchen movements were automatic, setting the table with her grandmother's Christmas china, arranging the pastries she'd ordered from the French bakery in Sausalito, preparing the coffee service that would accommodate everyone's preferences. Sarah liked her coffee strong and black, David preferred light cream, Madison insisted on oat milk foam, despite claiming dairy allergies that conveniently appeared and disappeared based on social situations. The family arrived in their usual staggered fashion, the children's excitement palpable as they rushed toward the Christmas tree with barely contained energy. Eleanor watched from the kitchen doorway as Lily discovered her stocking, stuffed with small treasures Eleanor had spent weeks selecting. The child's genuine delight was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, reminding Eleanor why she'd always found such joy in these celebrations. "Grandma, come see! Santa found your house perfectly!" Lily called out, her arms already full of small wrapped packages. Eleanor joined the family in the living room, settling into what had become her traditional spot on the sofa where she could oversee the gift distribution. The room buzzed with familiar Christmas morning energy, wrapping paper crinkling, children's voices rising in excitement, adults juggling coffee cups and camera phones to capture memories. The gift exchange followed its established hierarchy. Eleanor, as always, had given generously and thoughtfully. For Madison, she'd chosen an exquisite pearl bracelet from Tiffany, remembering how her daughter-in-law had admired a similar piece in a magazine. David received the vintage watch he'd mentioned wanting, a subtle homage to his father's collection. Sarah got the spa weekend package Eleanor knew she desperately needed, and Marcus received high-end woodworking tools that acknowledged his newfound passion and skill. For Lily, Eleanor had commissioned a custom art easel from a local craftsman, complete with professional supplies and a hand-painted sign reading Lily's Art Studio. The child's face transformed with pure joy, her small hands running over every detail as if memorizing it through touch. "This is the most beautiful thing ever, Grandma. Now I can paint real pictures like you taught me." In return, Eleanor received the kind of gifts that spoke volumes about the giver's perception of the recipient. From Madison, a generic candle set purchased from what was obviously a last-minute shopping trip, the kind of impersonal present one might give to a casual acquaintance. The accompanying card read simply, "Happy Holidays, Eleanor," in Madison's precise handwriting. David's gift showed more effort. A cashmere throw blanket in Eleanor's favorite shade of blue, but it carried the subtle message of someone buying for an elderly person whose primary needs were assumed to be warmth and comfort. Sarah's present was characteristically thoughtful. A beautiful coffee table book about interior design through the decades, acknowledging Eleanor's professional background and personal aesthetic. But it was Marcus's gift that brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. He presented her with a handmade cutting board crafted from reclaimed wood, its surface smooth as silk and warm to the touch. Burned into one corner was a simple inscription, "For Mom, who taught us that home is made with love, not just beautiful things. M." "I remembered how you always said cooking was how you showed love," Marcus said quietly, his words cutting through the general chaos of gift opening. "I wanted you to have something that honored that, something made specifically for you." Eleanor held the cutting board against her chest, feeling its solid weight and the care embedded in every sanded edge. This was what love looked like. Not expensive but invaluable, not generic but deeply personal, not obligatory but freely given. The contrast between Marcus's gift and the others created an uncomfortable awareness in the room, though Eleanor doubted anyone, but she fully recognized it. Madison seemed oblivious to any disparity, already arranging her new bracelet for a photo shoot against the Christmas tree backdrop. "Eleanor, can you move a little to the left? You're blocking the light," Madison directed, adjusting her phone angle. "I want to get the perfect shot of this gorgeous bracelet for my Christmas post," Eleanor obliged, stepping aside to accommodate Madison's documentation needs. But the casual dismissal stung with fresh intensity. She watched as Madison staged several versions of the same photo. The bracelet against the tree, on her wrist with the presents in the background, held up to catch the morning light streaming through the windows. The breaking point came when Lily, inspired by her new art supplies, asked Eleanor to help her hang a special ornament she'd created at school, a handmade angel crafted from popsicle sticks and painted with glittery gold paint. The child's face glowed with pride as she showed Eleanor the ornament, pointing out details she'd added to make it unique. "Grandma, can you help me find the perfect spot on the tree? Somewhere everyone can see her but where she won't get knocked off?" Eleanor knelt beside her granddaughter, studying the tree with the same serious consideration Lily was giving it. "I think right here, sweetheart, where the light hits just right. She'll look like she's really glowing." As Eleanor reached to help position the ornament, Madison's voice cut through the moment with sharp irritation. "Lily, don't bother Grandma with that. She's just decoration anyway. The tree's already done." The words hit the room like a physical blow, hanging in the sudden silence with devastating clarity. Eleanor's hand froze mid-air, the innocent ornament trembling in her grasp as the full weight of Madison's casual cruelty settled over the gathering. Just decoration. The phrase echoed in Eleanor's mind with perfect, horrible clarity. Not a person. Not a grandmother. Not someone with feelings or dignity or worth beyond her aesthetic contribution to other people's lives. Just decoration. Beautiful, elaborate, carefully maintained, but ultimately existing only to enhance other people's experiences. David's face flushed crimson, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words that might somehow undo what had just been said. "Madison, that's not—" "Mom, she didn't mean—" But Eleanor could see in Madison's eyes that she had meant it, exactly as she'd said it. There was no confusion, no misspeaking, no words taken out of context. Madison saw Eleanor as an object, lovely but lifeless, valuable only for what she contributed to the family's image and comfort. Sarah rose from her chair with swift, protective anger. "That was completely inappropriate, Madison. Mom is not decoration. She's the heart of this family." "Oh, please," Madison replied, already defensive but trying to maintain her position. "I just meant the tree is finished." Everyone's being so dramatic. But Lily, with the brutal honesty of childhood, looked between the adults with growing confusion and distress. "What does that mean? Why did you say Grandma is decoration? She's not decoration, she's Grandma. She's the most important person." The child's innocent words only highlighted the cruelty of Madison's comment, throwing it into sharper relief. Eleanor watched her family struggle with the aftermath. David's mortified attempts at damage control, Sarah's protective fury, Marcus's quiet but evident disgust, and Lily's bewildered hurt on her grandmother's behalf. Eleanor stood slowly, her body moving with dignity despite the emotional devastation coursing through her. She looked at each face in turn, seeing genuine distress in most of them, but in Madison's expression, she found only defensive irritation at having her words challenged. "Excuse me," Eleanor said with quiet composure, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I think I need to lie down for a few minutes. I have a headache." She walked from the room with measured steps, refusing to let them see her break. Behind her, voices rose in urgent conference. David's mortified apologies, Sarah's sharp criticism of Madison's behavior, Marcus's low voice saying something she couldn't quite catch. But Eleanor was already retreating into herself, processing the full magnitude of what had just occurred. In her bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed she'd shared with Robert for nearly 3 decades, holding Marcus's cutting board in her lap like a talisman. The contrast was devastating. His gift acknowledging her as someone who had shaped and nurtured her family through love and sacrifice, Madison's words reducing her to nothing more than attractive window dressing. The worst part wasn't the insult itself, though it cut deeply. The worst part was the recognition that Madison had simply said aloud what Eleanor was beginning to suspect others thought, but had been too polite to voice. Just decoration. Beautiful, expensive, carefully maintained but ultimately replaceable and without intrinsic worth. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the vanity mirror, seeing herself as if for the first time. At 72, she was still an attractive woman, well-groomed, elegantly dressed, carrying herself with the poise that came from decades of confidence and social success. But was that all she was? Had she become so focused on creating beautiful experiences for others that she'd forgotten to insist on being valued as more than just a provider of aesthetic pleasure? Downstairs, she could hear the muffled sounds of her family trying to salvage Christmas morning, their voices carrying the forced cheer of people attempting to pretend nothing had happened. But something had happened, something that couldn't be smoothed over with apologies or explanations, or David's well-meaning but ineffective attempts at damage control. Eleanor set the cutting board on her nightstand and lay back against her pillows, staring at the ceiling Robert had insisted on having hand-painted with subtle gold stars. For the first time in 2 years, she found herself grateful he wasn't here to witness this moment. Robert would have been quietly, devastatingly angry at Madison's comment, would have defended Eleanor with the kind of moral authority that came from absolute certainty about what was right and wrong. But Robert was gone, and Eleanor was left to navigate this new understanding alone. The realization that she might have spent decades mistaking tolerance for love, courtesy for respect, and compliance for appreciation settled over her like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. The gentle knock on her door came as expected, followed by Sarah's concerned voice. "Mom, can I come in?" Eleanor considered pretending to be asleep, but the maternal instinct to reassure her children remained stronger than her desire to hide. "Come in, sweetheart." Sarah entered with the careful demeanor of someone approaching a wounded animal, her face etched with the kind of protective fury that made Eleanor remember why she'd always been proud of her daughter's strength. "I am so sorry about what Madison said. It was cruel and completely wrong, and David knows it too, even if he's too much of a coward to say so properly." Eleanor sat up, smoothing her dress and trying to restore some semblance of composure. "It's all right, Sarah. I think I needed to hear it." "No, Mom, it's not all right. You are not decoration. You're the foundation this family is built on, and if Madison can't see that, then she's even more shallow than I thought." But as Eleanor looked at her daughter's angry, protective face, she realized that Sarah's defense, while well-intentioned, missed the deeper point. The issue wasn't whether Madison was right or wrong about Eleanor's worth. It was that Eleanor had somehow allowed herself to become vulnerable to such casual dismissal in the first place. "Thank you for defending me, sweetheart," Eleanor said quietly. "But I think I need some time to think about things." Sarah hesitated at the door, clearly wanting to say more to fix what had been broken. But Eleanor's expression must have conveyed her need for solitude, because Sarah finally nodded and withdrew, leaving Eleanor alone with the devastating clarity of her new understanding. Just decoration. The words would echo in her mind for days to come, becoming the catalyst for a transformation that would surprise everyone, including Eleanor herself. Eleanor remained in her bedroom for the next 2 hours, listening to the muffled sounds of her family attempting to salvage Christmas morning below. The forced cheerfulness in their voices carried through the hardwood floors. David's overcompensating enthusiasm, Sarah's protective efforts to redirect Lily's attention, even Marcus's gentle attempts to maintain normalcy for his niece's sake. But the damage had been done, and everyone knew it. She found herself drawn to the antique secretary desk in the corner of her bedroom, where she kept her most personal belongings. With deliberate movements, she pulled out the bottom drawer and retrieved the mahogany photo box Robert had given her on their 25th anniversary. Inside lay decades of memories, family photos, letters, cards, and mementos that chronicled their life together. Eleanor spread the photographs across her bedspread like tarot cards revealing her past. Here was their wedding day, Robert's face glowing with pride as he looked at his bride. Here were the children as babies, toddlers, teenagers. David serious even as a child, Sarah with her infectious smile, Marcus wild-haired and mischievous. Here was the photo from their housewarming party in 1996, Eleanor radiant in a flowing dress, as she welcomed guests to what would become the family's gathering place. But as she studied the images, Eleanor began to notice patterns she'd never seen before. In the more recent photos, the last decade especially, she appeared increasingly peripheral. While she was present in every family shot, she was often positioned at the edge of the frame, or slightly behind others, as if she were being gradually erased from the center of her own story. The shift had been so gradual she hadn't noticed it happening. When had she stopped being the vibrant woman who'd built a successful interior design business alongside raising 3 children? When had she become the accommodating widow, whose primary role was to provide beautiful backdrops for other people's lives. Eleanor picked up a photograph from 2018, Robert's last Christmas, though they hadn't known it then. She studied her own face in the image, seeing something she'd missed at the time. Even then, even with Robert still alive to anchor her sense of self, she'd worn this slightly strained smile of someone working too hard to make everything perfect for everyone else. The revelation hit her with startling clarity. She'd been disappearing long before Madison had put words to it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She moved to the window seat that overlooked the garden Robert had designed for her 40th birthday. The winter landscape was stark but beautiful, bare branches creating intricate patterns against the gray sky, the fountain silent under its protective covering, dormant flower beds waiting for spring's resurrection. Like her, the garden had periods of dormancy, but unlike her, it knew its seasons would come again. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mom?" Marcus's voice came through the door, quieter than Sarah's had been. "Can I come in?" Eleanor considered sending him away, but something in his tone, respectful rather than pitying, patient rather than urgent, made her reconsider. "Come in." Marcus entered with the careful movements of someone who understood trauma, who'd learned to read emotional weather from his years of recovery. He carried 2 cups of coffee and a plate with some of the Christmas pastries she'd barely touched at breakfast. "Thought you might want some fuel," he said simply, setting the coffee on her nightstand. "And before you say you're fine, I know you're not. Nobody would be after what Madison said." Eleanor accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling its familiar comfort. "I suppose I should have expected it. I've been fooling myself about a lot of things." Marcus settled into the reading chair that had been Robert's favorite, his presence somehow making the room feel less isolated. Of all her children, he was the one who'd learned to sit with discomfort, to let silence exist without rushing to fill it with false reassurances. "You want to talk about it?" he asked. Eleanor found herself studying her youngest child with new eyes. 2 years ago, Marcus had been a wreck. Hollow-eyed, unreliable, cycling through rehab programs and broken promises. Now he sat before her with the kind of centered presence that came from facing hard truths about oneself. When had he become the family member with the clearest vision? "I keep thinking about something your father said," Eleanor began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Right before he died, when the medications were making him confused, he grabbed my hand and said, 'Don't let them make you small, Ellie. Promise me you won't let them make you small.'" Marcus leaned forward, his attention complete. "I thought he was being dramatic, you know, the dying declarations of someone whose mind was affected by painkillers. But I think he saw something I couldn't see then, or wouldn't see." Eleanor stood and walked to her dresser, opening the jewelry box where she kept Robert's final letter to her, the one he'd written when his diagnosis became terminal, to be opened after his death. She'd read it countless times, but always focusing on his declarations of love and gratitude. Now she saw the warnings embedded in his gentle words. "Listen to this," she said, unfolding the letter with careful fingers. "My darling Ellie, you have spent our entire marriage making everyone else comfortable, beautiful, and happy. Now I need you to remember that you deserve the same care you've given everyone else. Don't let anyone treat you as less than the remarkable woman you are. Your worth isn't measured by what you give others, but by who you are. Be fierce about protecting that, especially when I'm not there to remind you." The words hung in the air between them, Robert's voice speaking across the divide of death, with startling relevance to her current situation. "He knew," Eleanor said quietly. "He knew I was in danger of becoming what Madison called me today, just decoration." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "Dad was right about a lot of things," he said finally. "But you know what I think? I think you're stronger than either of you realized. What Madison said, it was cruel, but it was also clarifying." Sometimes we need someone to say the worst thing out loud before we can see how wrong it is. Eleanor looked at her son with surprise. You think Madison was wrong? I know she was wrong. But more importantly, I think you're starting to know it too. Marcus set down his coffee and leaned forward. Mom, do you remember what you told me when I was trying to get sober? You said that hitting bottom wasn't about falling the farthest. It was about finally refusing to fall any further. The parallel struck Eleanor like a physical blow. She had been falling, hadn't she? Gradually, incrementally, year by year, accepting smaller and smaller roles in her own life until she'd become what Madison saw. Beautiful, elaborate, but ultimately without agency or voice. What Madison said today, that's your bottom, Marcus continued. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Eleanor walked to her closet and pulled out a business suit she hadn't worn in over a year, a sharp navy blue ensemble that had been her armor during her professional years. She held it against herself in the mirror, seeing not the accommodating widow she'd become, but glimpses of the woman she'd once been, the woman who'd built a business from nothing, who'd negotiated contracts and managed employees, who'd been respected for her expertise and feared for her standards. I'm going to call Patricia Vance, she said, her voice carrying a new note of determination. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The attorney? Your father's estate attorney, our estate attorney. Eleanor turned from the mirror, her reflection showing a woman in the process of remembering her own power. I'm going to make some changes. Quote, dot. What kind of changes? Eleanor folded the suit carefully and laid it on the bed. Tomorrow she would need armor for what came next, the kind that ensure I'm never mistaken for decoration again. Downstairs, the sounds of attempted normalcy continued. Lily's voice asking where Grandma was, David's strained explanations, Sarah's protective anger still simmering beneath forced pleasantries. But Eleanor was no longer listening to the family drama with the anxious attention of someone desperate to fix every problem. Instead, she was planning. For the first time in 2 years, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, Eleanor Hartwell was going to put her own needs first, not out of selfishness, but out of self-preservation. Not to hurt her family, but to save herself from disappearing entirely. Marcus stood to leave, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, Mom, I think Dad would be proud of you. I think he'd say it's about time. Eleanor nodded, feeling Robert's presence in the room like a warm embrace. He'd known this moment would come, had tried to prepare her for it in his letter. Now she understood that his final gift to her hadn't been just love. It had been permission to be fierce. As Marcus's footsteps faded down the hallway, Eleanor opened her phone and scrolled to Patricia Vance's contact information. The attorney had given Eleanor her personal number after Robert's death, insisting she call any time she needed legal guidance. Well, she needed guidance now, but more than that, she needed action. Eleanor composed a brief text. Patricia, I hope you're having a lovely Christmas. When you're back in the office, I'd like to schedule an appointment to discuss some changes to my estate planning. It's somewhat urgent. Thank you. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then set the phone aside and returned to the photographs scattered across her bed. But now, instead of seeing evidence of her gradual erasure, she saw something different. She saw a woman who had built a life of meaning and substance, who had raised 3 children and created countless moments of beauty and connection. Madison had been wrong. Eleanor wasn't just decoration. She was the architect of everything beautiful in her family's life. The traditions, the memories, the very foundation of love they all stood on. The question now was whether they would recognize her value before she stopped offering it so freely. Eleanor gathered the photographs and returned them to their box, but she kept Robert's letter on her nightstand. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of reclaiming herself. Today she would simply sit with the revolutionary idea that she deserved better than being treated as ornamental. Outside her window, the winter garden waited patiently for spring. Eleanor understood now that she'd been waiting too, for permission, for recognition, for someone else to validate her worth. She was done waiting. Eleanor's hands remained steady on the steering wheel as she navigated the familiar curves of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard toward downtown San Rafael. 3 days had passed since Christmas morning. 3 days since Madison's casual cruelty had shattered something fundamental inside her. The December fog clung to the hills like her newfound resolve clung to her bones, dense, impenetrable, and impossible to ignore. She had awakened that morning with the same clarity that had sustained her through 40 years of running her interior design business. The woman who had once negotiated million-dollar contracts with Silicon Valley executives was still there beneath the widow's grief and grandmother's indulgence. She simply needed to remember how to access her. The law offices of Vance & Associates occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian on 4th Street, its brass nameplate weathered but dignified. Eleanor had climbed these stairs many times over the past 15 years, for Robert's business ventures, their estate planning, and most recently, settling his affairs after the funeral. Patricia Vance had been more than their attorney. She had been their confidant through the complexities of sudden wealth and family dynamics. Eleanor paused at the top of the stairs, her arthritis protesting the climb more than it had even 6 months ago. But today, the physical discomfort felt like a reminder of her mortality rather than a limitation. Time was finite, and she would not waste what remained being treated as ornamentation in her own life. Patricia's receptionist, Maria, looked up with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Hartwell, how lovely to see you. Patricia is expecting you." The law office hadn't changed. Still the same burgundy leather chairs, still the same wall of legal volumes that Patricia claimed were mostly for show, but actually consulted regularly. Patricia Vance rose from behind her mahogany desk, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her navy suit impeccable. At 58, she commanded respect in courtrooms filled with men who underestimated her, much as Eleanor once had in boardrooms. "Eleanor." Patricia's greeting carried 15 years of professional relationship and genuine affection. "You sounded different on the phone." "Determined." "Because I am." Eleanor settled into the familiar chair across from Patricia's desk, her posture straighter than it had been in months. "I need to make changes to my will. Significant changes." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, but she reached for her legal pad with practiced professionalism. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" "I want to remove Madison from my will entirely. Every bequest, every trust provision, everything." The words hung in the air like a judgment rendered. Patricia set down her pen, studying Eleanor's face with the intensity that had made her one of Marin County's most respected estate attorneys. "Eleanor, that's a substantial change. Madison currently stands to inherit approximately $400,000 plus the Tahoe cabin. Before we proceed, I need to understand what's driving this decision. Is this about Christmas?" Eleanor had prepared for this question during the sleepless hours between Christmas night and this moment. Christmas was simply the moment I finally heard what I'd been deaf to for years. Madison told Lily not to bother me with hanging an ornament because I was just decoration. But Patricia, it wasn't just the words. It was the pattern they illuminated. She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. "For 5 years I've watched Madison dismiss my opinions, critique my choices, and treat my home like her personal stage set. She posts photographs of my Christmas decorations on Instagram, while simultaneously telling David they're, quote, excessive. She accepts my financial gifts while making jokes about my age to her friends. She has never once asked about my life, my interests, or my well-being, except when she needs something." Patricia nodded slowly, making notes. "These are serious concerns, but I have to ask, have you discussed this with David? Or with Sarah and Marcus? David enables her behavior because confrontation makes him uncomfortable. He inherited Robert's business sense, but not his backbone." Eleanor's voice carried no malice, only the tired disappointment of a mother watching her son choose the path of least resistance. "Sarah and Marcus have both tried to address Madison's attitude, but David always finds ways to excuse it or minimize it." And you're certain this isn't an emotional reaction to grief or the holidays? Eleanor smiled, and Patricia recognized the expression from years of negotiations. Sharp, calculating, utterly rational. Patricia, you've known me since Robert and I were building our first million. When have you ever seen me make an impulsive decision about money? Never. Patricia's admission was immediate and definitive. Then trust that this isn't impulse. This is business. Madison has shown me exactly how she values our relationship, as a transaction. She's banking on my death to fund her lifestyle while treating me like an inconvenient obstacle to her inheritance. I'm simply adjusting the terms to reflect reality. Patricia reviewed the file spread before her. Currently, your estate is structured to leave equal portions to your 3 children, with specific bequests to their spouses and grandchildren. Madison's portion includes liquid assets and the Lake Tahoe property. If we remove her entirely, how would you like to redistribute those assets? Eleanor had spent 3 sleepless nights considering this exact question. Give Madison's liquid inheritance to Sarah. She's carrying enormous student loan debt from nursing school, and she actually cares about my well-being. The Tahoe cabin should go to Marcus. He's the only one who visits me there just to spend time together, not to use it as a free vacation rental. And David? David keeps his inheritance unchanged. This isn't about punishing him, though his failure to protect me from his wife is disappointing. But he's still my son, and I still love him. I just won't pretend that his wife deserves to profit from my death while treating me with contempt during my life. Patricia was quiet for several minutes, reviewing documents and making calculations. Eleanor, I have to warn you about the potential consequences. This will likely destroy your relationship with Madison permanently, and possibly with David if he chooses to support his wife. Patricia, my relationship with Madison is already destroyed. I was just too afraid to acknowledge it. As for David, Eleanor's voice softened with genuine sadness. If David chooses his wife's entitlement over his mother's dignity, then I'll have learned something important about my son that I needed to know. There's also the possibility that Madison could contest the will, claiming undue influence or diminished capacity. Eleanor's laugh was sharp and confident. Let her try. You have 15 years of documentation showing my mental competency in complex financial decisions. And besides, she'll have to prove that someone influenced me. But the only person who influenced this decision was Madison herself. Patricia began pulling forms from her filing cabinet. Very well, I'll draft the amended will this week. But Eleanor, I strongly recommend that you consider how and when to tell the family about this change. The element of surprise could work in your favor legally, but it might damage relationships that could potentially be repaired. What relationships? Eleanor's question was gentle but pointed. The one where I'm treated like a checkbook with Christmas traditions. The one where my daughter-in-law posts pictures of my home while calling me decoration behind my back? The one where my generosity is expected but my presence is merely tolerated? She stood, her decision as final as her posture was erect. Patricia, I've spent 2 years since Robert's death trying to buy love with money and accommodation. It's time I learned who actually loves me, and who simply loves what I can provide. Patricia walked Eleanor to the door, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal concern. You're making the right choice legally. I just hope it's the right choice personally. Eleanor paused at the threshold, her hand on the brass doorknob that had welcomed her through years of legal consultations. Patricia, for the first time since Robert died, I feel like myself again. That has to count for something. As Eleanor descended the stairs to 4th Street, her phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Hope you're feeling better. David and I were thinking about New Year's at your house. I'll plan the menu. Party popper. Eleanor read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. The legal machinery was now in motion, transforming her Christmas revelation into concrete action. Soon, Madison would learn that Eleanor Hartwell was far more than decoration. She was the architect of her own life, and she was about to redesign it completely. The fog was lifting as Eleanor drove home, revealing the hills of Marin County in sharp, unforgiving clarity. Just like her vision of her family, she thought. Some truths only became visible when the comfortable obscurity was finally swept away. Eleanor's phone had been silent for exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, when Madison's third call came through. She watched the screen light up with her daughter-in-law's contact photo, a carefully curated selfie taken in Eleanor's own garden last spring, and let it ring through to voicemail, just as she had the previous two. The legal documents sat in neat piles on Robert's old desk, Patricia's precise handwriting outlining the steps that would formalize Eleanor's decision. But the real work had already begun in the small, seemingly insignificant moments that rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. It started with Madison's text about New Year's Eve, deleted without response. Then came the voicemail. "Eleanor, I hope you're not still upset about Christmas. You know how stressed I get during the holidays. Call me back so we can plan something fun." Eleanor didn't call back. The next morning brought a request that would have been automatic just a week ago. Madison needed someone to watch Lily for an afternoon so she could attend a yoga retreat in Napa. The old Eleanor would have canceled her own plans immediately. This Eleanor sent a polite but firm text. "I'm not available. Perhaps Sarah could help." Madison's response came within minutes. "Sarah works weekends. You're retired." Eleanor stared at the message for a long time, seeing it clearly for what it was. Not a request between family members, but a demand based on the assumption that Eleanor's time had no value. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on silence. By Thursday, David called. "Mom, Madison says you're not returning her calls. She's worried about you." Eleanor settled into Robert's reading chair, the leather worn smooth by decades of evening conversations. "I'm fine, David. I'm simply not available every time Madison needs something." "That's not like you. Perhaps it should be more like me." The silence stretched between them, filled with years of unspoken dynamics finally seeking air. David cleared his throat, the sound tight with discomfort. "Mom, if this is about Christmas morning, Madison didn't mean anything by that comment. She was just stressed about Lily making a mess with the ornaments." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the familiar disappointment settle in her chest. Even now, even with the truth laid bare, David chose the path of least resistance. "David, do you remember when your father was building the company? How he used to say that the most dangerous business partners were the ones who smiled while they picked your pockets." What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything, son. Everything." After David hung up, confused and slightly irritated, Eleanor sat in the gathering dusk of late December, watching shadows lengthen across the garden she and Robert had planted together. The roses were dormant now, bare canes reaching toward gray sky, but their roots ran deep. Come spring, they would bloom again, stronger for having weathered the winter. Friday brought Sarah, unexpected and breathless from her shift at the hospital, still wearing scrubs decorated with cartoon penguins. "Mom, what's going on?" "David called me all worried, saying you're acting strange." Eleanor looked at her daughter, really looked at her. Sarah's face showed the exhaustion of 12-hour shifts and the constant worry of caring for sick children, but her eyes held genuine concern, not the calculating assessment Eleanor had grown accustomed to from Madison. "I'm not acting strange, sweetheart. I'm acting differently. There is a distinction." Sarah settled onto the couch beside her mother's chair, kicking off her nursing shoes with visible relief. "Different how? I've stopped being available for things that don't respect my time or value my presence." "Like what?" Eleanor considered her words carefully. "Like being treated as a free babysitting service. Like having my home used as a backdrop for social media while my decorating choices are criticized. Like being expected to host elaborate parties that I'll be dismissed from planning but expected to pay for." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her nurse's training making her comfortable with difficult silences. "How long has this been bothering you?" "Years." but I told myself that keeping peace was more important than demanding respect. And now? Eleanor smiled, the expression carrying more strength than sadness. Now I realize that peace without respect isn't peace at all. It's just delayed conflict. Sarah reached for her mother's hand, her touch warm and steady. What changed your mind? Madison called me decoration, Sarah. In front of all of you. In my own home. While I was trying to help my granddaughter hang an ornament on the tree I'd spent days decorating for the family I'd spent weeks cooking for. Sarah's intake of breath was sharp. Mom, I heard her say that and I wanted to say something, but you were tired from work and didn't want to create a scene. I understand. But Sarah, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Madison showed me that she sees me as an object in my own life. They sat together as evenings settled around them, sharing the comfortable silence that only comes between people who truly know each other. Finally, Sarah spoke. What are you going to do? I've already done it. I'm just waiting to see how the family responds to the new boundaries. The weekend brought Marcus, arriving Saturday morning with a toolbox and a thermos of coffee, as he often did. But this time he lingered, after fixing the loose kitchen cabinet hinge, studying his mother's face with the hard-earned wisdom of someone who'd learned to read people's pain. You seem different, Mom. Calmer, but sharper somehow. Eleanor poured herself coffee from his thermos, appreciating that he'd remembered she preferred it black. I feel more like myself than I have in years. That's good. Marcus leaned against the counter, his work-roughened hands wrapped around his mug. I was worried after Christmas. Madison was way out of line. Were you surprised by what she said? Marcus considered the question with the careful honesty that recovery had taught him. Surprised she said it out loud? Yeah. Surprised she thought it? No. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised by his clarity. Marcus had spent years in therapy, learning to see past the comfortable lies families tell themselves. And David? David wants everyone to be happy without anyone having to change. It doesn't work that way. No, Eleanor agreed. It doesn't. Marcus finished his coffee and rinsed the mug, a small gesture that spoke volumes about respect and consideration. Mom, whatever you're planning, and I can see you're planning something, I want you to know that some of us see you clearly. You're not decoration. You never were. You know how children can be with delicate decorations. I see. Eleanor walked to the mantelpiece, her hand trailing along the marble edge where family photos smiled from silver frames. So when you told my granddaughter not to bother me because I was just decoration, you were protecting my ornaments? The silence that followed was absolute. Even Lily looked up from her coloring, sensing the sudden stillness. Madison's laugh was too bright, too quick. That's not what I said. You must have misheard. We all heard it, Madison. Marcus's voice cut through her denial like a blade. Every person in this room heard exactly what you said. Madison's composure cracked. It was a joke, a thoughtless comment during a stressful morning. I didn't mean anything by it. Eleanor turned from the mantelpiece, her movement deliberate and final. You meant exactly what you said. You see me as decoration in my own life. Beautiful when it serves your purposes, but ultimately useless. That's not true, isn't it? Eleanor's voice remained calm, but her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. For 5 years, Madison, you've treated my home like your personal photo studio while criticizing my choices. You've accepted my financial gifts while making jokes about my age. You've used my love for Lily to guilt me into free babysitting while dismissing my time as worthless because I'm retired. Madison's face flushed red. I never. You assume I'll host your parties, fund your celebrations, and provide whatever you need whenever you need it. But you've never once asked about my interests, my health, or my happiness unless it affected your convenience. David stood abruptly. Mom, this is getting out of hand. Madison made one thoughtless comment. One comment that revealed 5 years of truth. Eleanor's gaze shifted to her son, her disappointment evident. And David, your response has been to minimize her behavior and gaslight me about my own experiences. Even now, you're more concerned with Madison's comfort than your mother's dignity. I'm trying to keep the family together. No, you're trying to avoid confrontation. There's a difference. Sarah had been silent through the exchange, but now she stood, moving closer to her mother. Mom, what do you want from us? How do we fix this? Eleanor looked at her daughter with gratitude. Even in the midst of family chaos, Sarah asked the right question, not how to change Eleanor back, but how to move forward. I want honesty, Eleanor said simply. I want to know where I actually stand with each of you, not where you pretend I stand when you need something. Madison's voice rose, her careful composure finally shattering. This is ridiculous. We're here because we care about you. We're worried about you making irrational decisions. What irrational decisions? The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. Madison glanced at David, who paled visibly. Madison, he warned quietly. But Madison was past caution, driven by frustration, and something that looked dangerously like panic. Like this whole situation? Pulling away from family, making dramatic statements about respect and dignity. We're worried you might do something. Permanent. Permanent like what? Like. Madison's voice dropped, but her words carried clearly through the room. Like changing your will or something equally destructive. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor felt the last piece of her old self, the part that had made excuses and sought peace at any price, quietly die. I see. Eleanor's voice was soft, almost gentle. So your real concern isn't my mental health or my grief. Your real concern is my money. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. You're worried that if I stop accepting disrespect, I might stop rewarding it financially. Madison's face went white, then red, then white again. You wouldn't. Actually, Madison, I already have. Eleanor walked to Robert's desk and picked up the legal documents Patricia had delivered that morning. I've removed you from my will entirely. Every bequest, every trust provision, every inheritance you've been counting on. It's gone. The explosion was immediate and total. Madison's shriek of outrage collided with David's shocked protests and Sarah's sharp intake of breath. Only Marcus remained still, his face unsurprised but sad. You can't do that, Madison's voice cracked with hysteria. I'm family. I'm David's wife. Lily is your granddaughter. Lily will be provided for through her father. You, however, have made it clear that you see our relationship as transactional. I'm simply adjusting the terms. David stumbled to his feet, his face ashen. Mom, please, think about what you're doing. Madison made a mistake, but destroying the family over one comment. I'm not destroying anything, David. I'm revealing what was already broken. Madison turned on David, her fury finding its true target. Do something. Talk to her. She's lost her mind. But Eleanor continued, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. The will has been changed, witnessed, and filed. It's legally binding. And Madison, if you attempt to contest it on grounds of mental incompetency, you'll find Patricia Vance has 15 years of documentation proving otherwise. The room fell silent, except for Madison's ragged breathing and Lily's quiet whimpering as she pressed closer to her coloring book. Eleanor looked at each of them in turn. David's shock, Sarah's torn expression, Marcus's quiet support, Madison's naked rage, and Lily's confusion. Now you all know exactly where you stand, Eleanor said quietly. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The aftermath of Eleanor's revelation settled over the following weeks like nuclear fallout, invisible but devastating, contaminating everything it touched. Madison's shriek of, "You'll regret this," as David dragged her from the house on New Year's Eve, became the opening salvo in a war Eleanor hadn't wanted, but would no longer avoid. By January 3rd, Madison had consulted 3 attorneys about challenging Eleanor's mental competency. Eleanor knew this because Patricia called with barely concealed amusement. "She's fishing for someone to tell her what she wants to hear," Patricia reported. "Unfortunately for her, your medical records, financial decisions, and 15 years of complex legal transactions paint the picture of someone in full possession of her faculties." "What did you tell her lawyer?" "That Mrs. Hartwell is my client, not her, and that all communication should go through me." He hung up rather quickly after that. But Madison's legal maneuvering was only the beginning. By the second week of January, Eleanor discovered the true extent of her daughter-in-law's desperation when Sarah arrived at her door, visibly shaken. "Mom, I need to tell you something about Madison. She called me at work yesterday." Eleanor set down her tea, recognizing the gravity in Sarah's voice. "What did she say?" "She wanted me to talk you into seeing a geriatric psychiatrist. She said she'd found one who specialized in inheritance-related dementia, which isn't even a real diagnosis, and that if we all coordinated our stories about your concerning behavior, we could get a court order for evaluation." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And you said?" "I told her that attempting to manufacture evidence of mental incompetency was elder abuse and potentially criminal, and that if she contacted me about this again, I'd report her to Adult Protective Services myself." Sarah's fierce protectiveness warmed something in Eleanor's chest that had been cold since Christmas morning. "Thank you. Mom, I need you to know, whatever problems we've had as a family, whatever I've failed to see or address, I will never let anyone question your capacity to make your own decisions. Never." Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing the strong fingers that had comforted countless sick children. "Your father would be proud of you." Meanwhile, David's world was crumbling in ways Eleanor hadn't anticipated. Marcus visited the following Saturday, his usual toolbox replaced by groceries and a grim expression. "David's sleeping on my couch," he announced without preamble. Eleanor looked up from the book she'd been reading, a mystery novel she'd started 3 times since Robert's death, but never finished because someone always needed something. "What happened?" "Madison gave him an ultimatum. Either he gets you to reverse the will change, or she files for divorce and takes Lily to live with her parents in Oregon." Eleanor's book slipped from her hands. "She can't take Lily out of state without court approval. She can if David doesn't contest it. And she's threatening to make it ugly if he does, claiming he chose his mentally unstable mother over his daughter's financial security." The cruelty was breathtaking even by Madison's standards. Eleanor had expected anger, manipulation, even legal challenges. She hadn't expected Madison to weaponize an 8-year-old child. "How is David handling it?" Marcus snorted, unpacking groceries with more force than necessary. "About as well as you'd expect. He keeps saying this is all a misunderstanding that can be fixed if everyone just calms down and talks rationally. And you told him that some people can't be reasoned with because they don't operate from reason, they operate from entitlement." Marcus paused in arranging vegetables in the refrigerator. "Mom, he's gonna come here and beg you to change your mind. For Lily's sake." Eleanor had been expecting this conversation for 2 weeks. When David's car pulled into her driveway that evening, she was ready. He looked terrible. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same clothes he'd had on when Marcus mentioned him that morning. Eleanor let him in, but didn't offer food or comfort, sensing that this conversation required clear boundaries. "Mom, please." David's voice cracked with exhaustion. "I'll do anything. I'll make Madison apologize. I'll make sure she treats you better. David, stop." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't make Madison do anything. That's been the problem all along." "But Lily." "What about Lily?" "Madison's going to take her away. She'll move to Oregon and I'll barely see my daughter. Please, Mom, just put Madison back in the will. You don't have to leave her much, just something to show." "To show what?" "That disrespecting me has no consequences? That I can be bullied into submission if the stakes are high enough." David's facade finally cracked completely. "She's threatening to destroy my life. She says she'll tell everyone you're mentally ill, that I'm an unfit father for supporting you. She'll make sure I lose custody of Lily entirely." Eleanor looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw not the successful businessman who'd inherited his father's company, but a frightened child who'd never learned to stand up to bullies. "David, Madison is not threatening to destroy your life. She's revealing that she's been controlling it all along. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What can I do? If I fight her, I lose Lily. If I don't fight her, I lose you." "No, son. If you fight for what's right, you might save your daughter from growing up thinking that threats and manipulation are normal parts of love." David stared at her, something flickering behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the first stirring of actual backbone. "I don't know how to fight her, Mom. I've never been good at conflict." Eleanor moved to Robert's desk, pulling out a business card Patricia had given her. "Then learn. This is a family law attorney Patricia recommends. She specializes in custody cases involving parental alienation." David took the card with trembling fingers. "What if Madison follows through on her threats? Then you'll discover what your father always knew, that the people who truly matter will stand by you when times get hard, and the people who don't were never really on your side to begin with." As David left, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of hope and sorrow. Hope that her son might finally find his spine. Sorrow that it had taken his daughter being used as a weapon to make him consider it. The next morning brought unexpected support from a source Eleanor hadn't anticipated. Her neighbor, Helen Martinez, appeared at the door with coffee and gossip. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me saying, but half the neighborhood is talking about your daughter-in-law's behavior. She's been calling people, trying to get them to agree that you've been acting strange lately." Eleanor accepted the coffee with raised eyebrows. And Martha Henderson told her that the only strange thing about you lately is that you finally stopped letting that girl walk all over you. Then she hung up. Eleanor laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. Martha said that, "Honey, we've all been watching that woman treat you like hired help for years. Some of us are just glad you finally decided to do something about it." As Helen left, Eleanor realized that her family drama had revealed something she hadn't expected: the clarity of outside perspective. People who had no financial stake in her decisions could see what her own family had been blind to, or chose to ignore. The house felt different in the evenings now, emptier but also more peaceful. Eleanor finished her mystery novel, started a new one, and began planning a trip to Europe she'd been postponing since Robert's death. For the first time in years, her time belonged entirely to her. It was, she realized, exactly what she'd been fighting for all along. Eleanor was arranging the last of her winter camellias in a crystal vase when she heard the soft knock at her front door. Through the frosted glass, she could see the small silhouette that had become achingly familiar over the past 6 weeks. Lily, standing alone on the doorstep with her little backpack and that serious expression she'd worn too often lately. "Grandma?" Lily's voice was smaller than usual as Eleanor opened the door. "Daddy said I could come visit while he runs errands." "Too often." Eleanor's heart clenched at the careful way her granddaughter spoke, as if she were walking on glass. "Of course, sweetheart. Come in out of the cold." As Lily shed her pink winter coat, Eleanor noticed the drawing clutched in her small hand. Another of her detailed family portraits that had become more frequent since Christmas. This one showed stick figures arranged around what appeared to be a dinner table, but with notable gaps between some of the figures. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" Eleanor asked, settling into their familiar rhythm despite the heaviness that had settled over all their interactions lately. "Yes, please." Lily climbed onto her usual stool at the kitchen island, smoothing her drawing carefully on the granite surface. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Eleanor heating milk and melting chocolate while Lily added final touches to her artwork with colored pencils she kept in Eleanor's kitchen drawer. It was when Eleanor set the steaming mug in front of her granddaughter that Lily looked up with those clear 8-year-old eyes and asked the question that shattered Eleanor's carefully maintained composure. "Grandma, why doesn't Mommy like you anymore?" Eleanor's hand froze halfway to her own mug. In 6 weeks of family upheaval, legal consultations, and strained conversations, no one had been quite so direct. Children, she reflected, had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things that adults spent endless energy dancing around. "What makes you think Mommy doesn't like me, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked carefully, settling onto the stool beside Lily. "She won't let me call you on school nights anymore. And when I drew you a picture last week, she threw it away when she thought I wasn't looking." Lily's voice was matter-of-fact, but Eleanor could see the confusion and hurt beneath her composure. "And Daddy gets sad whenever I ask when we're going to have dinner at your house again." Eleanor studied her granddaughter's face, seeing so much of Robert's direct honesty there, mixed with her own stubborn chin and David's sensitive eyes. How could she explain adult failures and wounded pride to a child who loved unconditionally? "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements," Eleanor said slowly. "It's not about you, Lily. You haven't done anything wrong." "But it is about you," Lily said with startling clarity. "I heard Mommy telling her friend on the phone that you're being impossible and that Daddy needs to handle you. What does that mean?" The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. Handle her. As if she were a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. She took a steadying breath, reminding herself that Lily needed reassurance, not her grandmother's anger. "It means that your mom and I see some things differently," Eleanor said. "But that doesn't change how much I love you, or how proud I am of the kind, smart girl you're becoming." Lily nodded solemnly, then pushed her drawing toward Eleanor. "I drew us at Christmas dinner, but I couldn't remember how to make everyone happy like before." Looking at the drawing, Eleanor saw the gaps Lily had drawn between the figures, literal distance representing the emotional chasm that had opened in their family. Madison's stick figure was notably separate from the others, while Lily had drawn herself reaching toward Eleanor's figure with both stick arms. "You know what I think?" Eleanor said, tracing one of Lily's careful lines with her finger. "I think families are like gardens. Sometimes they need tending. And sometimes certain plants don't grow well together, but the plants that belong will always find a way to thrive." "Are you and Mommy plants that don't grow well together?" Eleanor considered this carefully. "Your Mommy and I have different ideas about how families should treat each other. That's made things difficult." "But you're still my grandma." "Always," Eleanor said firmly. "No matter what happens between the grown-ups, that will never change." They sipped their hot chocolate in contemplative silence until Eleanor heard another car in the driveway. Through the window she saw David climbing out of his sedan alone. No Madison, which had become the pattern for his recent visits. "Daddy's back," Lily announced, but made no move to gather her things. When David knocked, Eleanor called for him to come in. He appeared in the kitchen doorway looking haggard, his usually perfectly styled hair disheveled, and his tie loosened. The successful tech executive had been replaced by a man who looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Hi, Mom, Lily, why don't you go wash your hands? We should head home soon." "Can I finish my hot chocolate first?" "Of course," Eleanor said before David could respond. "Take your time." David accepted Eleanor's offer of coffee and sat heavily at the kitchen table. The silence stretched between them, filled with 6 weeks of unspoken tensions and carefully avoided confrontations. "She's been having nightmares," David said finally, nodding toward Lily. "About the family being broken. Madison thinks it's just an adjustment phase, but you know better," Eleanor finished. David's laugh was bitter. "I'm starting to realize there's a lot I should have known better about." Eleanor studied her eldest son, seeing the weight he carried in the slope of his shoulders and the new lines around his eyes. This was the child who had always tried to fix everything, to keep everyone happy, the peacekeeper who had somehow lost sight of what peace actually meant. "David," she said gently, "you can't protect everyone from the consequences of their choices. Not Madison's, and not mine. But Lily is 8 years old, and she's already learned to hide her feelings to keep the peace. Does that sound familiar? The words hit their mark. David's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment Eleanor saw the little boy who used to come to her when the other children teased him for being too sensitive. "I've made such a mess of everything," he whispered. "Madison's been... God, Mom, she's been pressuring me to get you declared incompetent. She found some lawyer who specializes in contesting wills, and she's convinced that if we can prove you're not thinking clearly..." Eleanor's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "Incompetent?" "I told her absolutely not. I told her you're sharper than most people half your age, but she..." David's voice broke. "She said if I don't help her, she'll take Lily and leave. That I'll lose my daughter because I chose my mother over my wife." "And what did you tell her?" David looked up at Eleanor with eyes full of shame and something that might have been the beginning of resolve. "I told her that maybe she should think about what kind of mother uses a child as leverage against her own husband." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope, but something closer to recognition. That must have been difficult. "It was the first time I've stood up to her in 5 years of marriage," David admitted. "And you know what? She backed down. For the first time since I've known her, Madison actually backed down when someone called her bluff." From the powder room came the sound of Lily humming while she washed her hands. The innocent melody a counterpoint to the heavy conversation in the kitchen. "David," Eleanor said carefully, "I need you to understand something. When I changed my will, it wasn't about punishing Madison or even about the money. It was about refusing to be treated like I don't matter. I know that now. I should have seen it before, but I was so focused on keeping everything calm that I forgot some things are worth fighting for." David reached across the table and took his mother's hand. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I let her treat you badly. And I'm sorry I didn't protect you the way Dad would have wanted me to." Eleanor squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from his weekend woodworking projects, the hobby he'd taken up to escape the tension at home. "Your father would be proud of you for recognizing it now. That takes courage." "Does it? Because it feels like cowardice took me this long to see what was right in front of me." "Courage isn't the absence of fear, David. It's doing the right thing despite the fear." Lily returned to the kitchen, her face freshly washed, and her drawing carefully rolled up in her small hands. "Are we talking about grown-up things?" she asked with the perceptiveness that continually surprised the adults around her. "We're talking about how to make sure you know you're loved," Eleanor said, pulling Lily against her side. "Even when grown-ups make mistakes." "I know I'm loved," Lily said simply. "You tell me every time I see you, and Daddy tells me every night, and Uncle Marcus always says it when he hugs me goodbye." "What about Mommy?" David asked quietly. Lily considered this with 8-year-old seriousness. "Mommy loves me, but she's angry a lot lately. She says it's because you and Grandma are being difficult, but I think maybe she's scared." Eleanor and David exchanged glances over Lily's head. Out of the mouths of babes. "Scared of what, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know, but when I'm scared, I get angry too sometimes. Maybe that's what's happening." As David prepared to leave with Lily, Eleanor made a decision that had been forming throughout their conversation. "David, I want you to know that I'm willing to discuss some middle ground. Not because Madison demanded it, but because I love you and Lily, and I won't let my need for respect destroy what's worth preserving." David paused in helping Lily with her coat. "What kind of middle ground?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think it's time to stop letting fear make our decisions. Yours, mine, or Madison's." After they left, Eleanor sat in her kitchen surrounded by the lingering warmth of hot chocolate and honest conversation. Lily's drawing lay unrolled on the counter, and Eleanor studied it again with new eyes. The gaps between the figures weren't necessarily permanent, she realized. They were simply space waiting to be filled with whatever came next. The phone rang, and Eleanor glanced at the caller ID to see Patricia Vance's office number. As she reached for the receiver, Eleanor felt a shift in her perspective. Not a retreat from her position, but an evolution of it. Sometimes the greatest strength lay not in standing immovable, but in choosing which battles deserve to be fought and which deserve to be transformed into something better. "Patricia?" Eleanor said as she answered. "I think it's time we discussed some additional options." Patricia Vance's voice on the phone carried the careful neutrality that Eleanor had come to associate with difficult legal conversations. "Eleanor, I've drafted the conditional restoration documents we discussed. Are you certain this is the path you want to take?" Eleanor stood at her kitchen window, watching the February rain create rivulets down the glass. 3 days had passed since her conversation with David and Lily, 3 days of sleepless nights and careful consideration. "I'm certain, Patricia, but I want to be very clear about the terms. This isn't capitulation. It's offering Madison a chance to earn what she feels entitled to. The conditions you've outlined are comprehensive," Patricia said diplomatically. "Family therapy, community service with elderly populations, a written apology acknowledging past behavior, and a full year of respectful interaction before any inheritance restoration. Many would consider these terms rather stringent. Many haven't been called just decoration in their own home," Eleanor replied firmly. "I'm not asking Madison to grovel, Patricia. I'm asking her to demonstrate that she can see me as a person worthy of basic respect." 2 hours later, Eleanor sat in her living room arranging the documents Patricia had delivered. The February afternoon light was weak but steady, illuminating the formal papers that would either begin healing her fractured family or confirm its permanent division. At precisely 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Eleanor had requested that all family members attend this meeting, all except Lily, who was spending the afternoon with a school friend, safely removed from whatever adult drama might unfold. Sarah arrived first, her nurse's uniform traded for casual clothes that couldn't quite hide her exhaustion from a double shift. She embraced Eleanor warmly before settling into the wingback chair that had become her preferred spot during these family conferences. "How are you holding up, Mom?" Sarah asked, studying Eleanor's face with professional concern. "I'm managing," Eleanor replied. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Marcus followed minutes later, his work boots carefully cleaned but still showing traces of the job site. He'd driven straight from a construction project in Petaluma, his tool belt exchanged for a simple flannel shirt and jeans. His presence had become a source of quiet strength for Eleanor, the son who asked for nothing and offered everything. "Need anything set up?" Marcus asked, noting the formal arrangement of chairs Eleanor had prepared. "Just your support," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand briefly. David arrived precisely on time, alone as Eleanor had expected. His face carried the strain of someone caught between competing loyalties. But his eyes held a resolution that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. "Madison's coming," he said without preamble. "She'll be a few minutes late. She had to arrange childcare for Lily." "Is she planning to participate constructively?" Sarah asked pointedly. David's silence was answer enough. When Madison finally arrived, 20 minutes late, she brought with her an energy that immediately changed the room's dynamic. Her designer coat and perfectly styled hair seemed calculated to project confidence, but Eleanor noticed the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands gripped her purse with white knuckles. "Eleanor," Madison said with brittle politeness, "I hope we can resolve this situation quickly. I have a conference call with a potential sponsor at 5. "Please sit down," Eleanor replied evenly, gesturing to the remaining chair she'd positioned slightly apart from the family grouping. Patricia entered through the side door Eleanor had left unlocked, her briefcase and professional demeanor adding weight to the proceedings. "Good afternoon, everyone. I believe Eleanor has explained why we're here today. I have a proposal," Eleanor began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Patricia has prepared a conditional restoration agreement that would return Madison to my will, but with specific requirements that must be met over the course of 1 year. Madison's carefully controlled expression flickered. "Conditional? What kind of conditions?" Eleanor nodded to Patricia, who opened her briefcase and distributed copies of the agreement. The document outlines 4 primary requirements, Patricia explained. First, participation in family therapy with a licensed counselor, specifically addressing communication patterns and respect within the family dynamic. Family therapy? Madison's voice rose slightly. I'm not the one who... Second, Patricia continued smoothly, completion of 20 hours of volunteer service with elderly populations at a facility of your choosing. Third, a written apology acknowledging past behavior and committing to changed interaction patterns. David leaned forward, studying his copy intently. Sarah looked thoughtful but hopeful. Marcus remained silent, his expression unreadable. And fourth, Patricia concluded, demonstration of sustained, respectful behavior toward Eleanor for a full calendar year, as witnessed and verified by family members. The silence that followed was profound. Eleanor watched Madison's face cycle through surprise, indignation, and calculation, before settling into something that might have been strategic consideration. This is ridiculous, Madison said finally. You're treating me like a child who needs to be punished. I'm treating you like an adult who can choose to earn what she wants, Eleanor replied calmly. The inheritance isn't a right, Madison. It's a gift, and gifts should be given to people who value the giver. Value you? Madison's careful composure cracked. I've spent 5 years playing happy family, attending your dinners, listening to your stories, pretending to care about your little decorating projects. Pretending, Eleanor repeated quietly. Thank you for the honesty. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Madison, please. Mom is offering you a chance to make this right. Make what right? I made one comment, and suddenly I'm the villain in this family drama. Sarah's professional calm wavered. One comment? Madison, you've been dismissive and condescending to Mom for years. The decoration comment was just the moment she finally had enough. Examples, Madison demanded. Give me specific examples of this alleged pattern of disrespect. The challenge hung in the air, and Eleanor saw her adult children exchange glances. It was Marcus who spoke first, his voice level but firm. Last Easter, when Mom mentioned feeling dizzy and you told her she was probably just seeking attention. Christmas 2 years ago, when you rolled your eyes every time she talked about Dad and finally told her she needed to move on already, Sarah added. The time you posted those Instagram photos of her house and tagged them with elderly chic and, quote, grandma style, David said quietly, his shame evident. Or how about every family gathering where you interrupt her stories or change the subject when she's speaking, Marcus continued. We've all seen it, Madison. We just didn't call it out. Madison's face flushed red. Those are minor things, normal family dynamics. Everyone gets annoyed with their in-laws sometimes. But not everyone calls their mother-in-law just decoration, Eleanor said. And not everyone treats basic courtesy as an unbearable burden. Patricia cleared her throat diplomatically. The question before us is whether these conditions are acceptable for inheritance restoration. Madison, you have the option to accept these terms, reject them, and forfeit any claim to Eleanor's estate, or negotiate modifications that Eleanor might consider reasonable. Madison looked around the room, her gaze stopping on each family member as if calculating their support. Eleanor could see the wheels turning, financial need warring with wounded pride, entitlement battling with practical reality. How much are we talking about? Madison asked bluntly. Madison, David said, mortified. No, it's a fair question, Eleanor said. Patricia, would you explain the financial implications? Currently, Madison would inherit approximately $400,000 under the original will structure, along with several valuable pieces of jewelry and art. The total value of forfeited assets approaches $600,000. Madison's intake of breath was audible. Eleanor saw the moment when financial reality overcame pride. $600,000 was apparently worth swallowing her dignity. The therapy requirement, Madison said slowly, would that be individual or group? Family therapy, specifically addressing communication and respect issues, Patricia replied. Eleanor has suggested Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who specializes in intergenerational family dynamics. And the volunteer work? 20 hours over the course of the year. We've identified several facilities in Marin County that work with elderly populations. Meals on Wheels, the Senior Center in San Rafael, or the Assisted Living Facility in Novato. Madison was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her purse. The written apology. What exactly would that need to include? Eleanor spoke carefully. Acknowledgement of specific behaviors that were hurtful. Understanding of how those behaviors affected our relationship. And commitment to different interaction patterns going forward. And if I complete all these requirements, the inheritance is fully restored? Upon successful completion and demonstration of sustained respectful behavior, yes, Patricia confirmed. Madison looked directly at Eleanor for the first time since arriving. And if I refuse? Then you forfeit any claim to my estate and we all know where we stand, Eleanor replied steadily. The room fell silent again. Eleanor could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the distant sound of traffic on the street outside, the soft whisper of rain against the windows. I need time to think about this, Madison said finally. How much time? Eleanor asked. A week. 3 days, Eleanor countered. This offer expires Friday at 5 o'clock. Madison's eyes flashed with anger. You're really going to hold my feet to the fire on this? I'm going to treat this with the seriousness it deserves, Eleanor replied. This isn't a negotiation about punishment, Madison. It's an opportunity for our family to heal, but healing requires genuine effort from everyone involved. As the meeting broke up, family members lingered in small clusters. Sarah hugged Eleanor goodbye with tears in her eyes. I'm proud of you, Mom. This took real courage. Marcus kissed Eleanor's cheek. Whatever she decides, you're doing the right thing. David approached last, his expression troubled. Mom, I want you to know that regardless of Madison's decision, I support yours. I should have supported you from the beginning. After everyone left, Eleanor sat alone in her living room, surrounded by the aftermath of difficult choices. The conditional restoration documents lay on her coffee table, representing either the beginning of genuine family healing or the final confirmation that some relationships couldn't be salvaged. She thought about Lily's drawing, still hanging on her refrigerator, stick figures with gaps between them, waiting to be filled with whatever came next. Perhaps those gaps weren't empty spaces after all. Perhaps they were opportunities for something better to grow. Outside, the February rain continued to fall, washing the world clean for whatever spring might bring. Eleanor stood in her kitchen, humming softly as she arranged the Christmas cookies on her grandmother's china platter. The same kitchen that had witnessed so much pain exactly 1 year ago now felt transformed, not by new appliances or decorations, but by something far more profound. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow, illuminating a woman who had found herself again. Need any help in there, beautiful? Walter's voice carried from the living room, where he was adjusting the fireplace screen. At 74, he moved with the careful precision of a man who understood the value of taking his time, but his eyes still held the mischievous spark that had first caught Eleanor's attention at their church's grief support group 8 months ago. I'm perfectly fine, thank you, Eleanor called back, surprised by how naturally the words came. A year ago, she would have insisted she needed help she didn't actually require, desperate to feel useful. Now, she asked for assistance when she wanted it, and politely declined when she didn't. The difference was everything. The doorbell rang, and Eleanor felt her heart lift with genuine anticipation rather than the anxious hope that had characterized previous holiday gatherings. Through the front window, she could see David's car in the driveway. Just David's car. No second vehicle. No Madison. The absence that had initially felt like a wound had gradually become a relief, like finally removing a shoe that had been pinching for years. Grandma Eleanor! Lily burst through the front door the moment David opened it, her 8-year-old energy filling the space with pure joy. She wore a red velvet dress that Eleanor recognized as one of Sarah's old Christmas outfits, carefully altered to fit her granddaughter's smaller frame. In her hands, she carried a wrapped present that was clearly a drawing, based on its size and careful construction paper wrapping. "My darling girl," Eleanor knelt to embrace her granddaughter, marveling at how much Lily had grown in just a year. Not just physically, though that was evident too, but emotionally. The child's eyes no longer held the confusion and hurt that had marked the previous Christmas. David's dedication to co-parenting, to shielding Lily from adult conflicts while being honest about family changes, had given his daughter the stability she needed to flourish. David followed more slowly, carrying a bottle of wine, and wearing an expression Eleanor hadn't seen in years: peaceful confidence. The divorce had been difficult, but watching her son emerge from Madison's shadow had been like watching him remember who he was supposed to be. He'd lost weight, started running again, and most importantly, had found his voice. "Merry Christmas, Mom." He kissed her cheek, and she could smell his familiar cologne mixed with the crisp December air. "The house looks beautiful." Eleanor glanced around her living room, taking in the decorations with fresh eyes. They were lovely. She'd always had excellent taste, but they were also restrained, elegant rather than overwhelming. She'd learned the difference between creating beauty and performing it. "Thank you, sweetheart. David, I'd like you to meet Walter officially." She guided her son toward the older gentleman who had risen from the sofa with quiet dignity. "Walter Henderson. This is my eldest son, David." The two men shook hands, and Eleanor watched David assess this new presence in his mother's life. She saw the moment when her son recognized something in Walter's demeanor, a strength that didn't need to prove itself, a kindness that wasn't performed for effect. It was the same quality David was learning to cultivate in himself. "Mr. Henderson," David said with genuine warmth, "Mom's told me wonderful things about you. Please call me Walter. And she's told me wonderful things about all of you." Walter's response was measured but sincere. He'd insisted on meeting each of Eleanor's children individually before this gathering, understanding that blending into their family dynamic required patience and respect. The front door opened again, and Sarah's voice preceded her into the room. "Sorry, we're running late. James had to help a neighbor with their car." She appeared in the doorway with her characteristic rushed energy, but Eleanor noticed immediately that the frantic quality was gone. Sarah looked happy, genuinely, uncomplicated happy. Behind her came James and their two children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Michael, both clutching presents and vibrating with Christmas morning excitement. Sarah had made the decision 6 months ago to cut back her hours at the hospital, and the change had transformed not just her stress levels, but her entire family's dynamic. She no longer carried the weight of guilt about not visiting Eleanor enough, because their time together had become quality rather than obligation. "Sarah, James, kids, this is Walter." Eleanor made the introductions with smooth ease, watching her daughter take in this new development with curiosity rather than concern. Sarah had been the first to encourage Eleanor's tentative steps back into social life, understanding that her mother's happiness didn't threaten their relationship but enhanced it. "It's lovely to meet you, Walter," Sarah said, stepping forward to shake his hand. "I hope Mom's been keeping you entertained with her stories about our childhood antics." "Only the embarrassing ones," Eleanor interjected with a laugh. Surprised by her own playfulness, Walter chuckled, and she caught his eye across the room. The look they shared was warm, comfortable, the look of two people who had found unexpected companionship in their golden years. The sound of boots on the front porch announced Marcus's arrival. Eleanor's youngest son entered with his girlfriend, Rebecca, a fellow carpenter he'd met at a job site 3 months ago. Rebecca was a sturdy, practical woman with calloused hands and an easy smile, and Eleanor had liked her immediately. Marcus looked healthier than Eleanor had seen him since before his addiction began. Clear-eyed, confident, genuinely content. "Hey, everyone," Marcus said, stamping snow off his boots. "Sorry, we're a few minutes behind. Had to finish installing Mrs. Patterson's new railing this morning." Eleanor felt a surge of pride watching her youngest son. His carpentry business was thriving, built on reliability and quality workmanship rather than cutting corners. He'd found his calling in creating things that would last, and the metaphor wasn't lost on anyone in the family. He'd become the most dependable of her children, the one who called regularly just to check in, who showed up without being asked when she needed help. "Marcus, Rebecca, come meet Walter," Eleanor said, drawing them into the circle of introductions. She watched Walter navigate these meetings with quiet grace, neither trying too hard to impress nor holding himself aloof. He understood that these relationships would develop naturally or not at all, and his patience made space for genuine connection. As the adults talked, Lily tugged on Eleanor's sleeve with the insistence only an 8-year-old could muster. "Grandma, can I give you my present now? I can't wait anymore." Eleanor laughed, remembering her own children's Christmas morning impatience. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's all gather around." The family settled into the living room, and Eleanor carefully unwrapped Lily's gift with the ceremony such offerings deserved. Inside was a drawing that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. It showed the entire family, Eleanor in the center, wearing a golden crown, surrounded by David, Sarah, Marcus, and Lily herself. But this wasn't a child's simple stick figure representation. Lily had taken her art lessons to heart, and the drawing showed real skill, real observation. The title, written in Lily's careful 8-year-old script across the top, read, "Grandma the Queen of Our Family." "Oh, my darling," Eleanor whispered, her eyes filling with tears. But these weren't tears of pain or loneliness. They were tears of recognition. Finally, someone saw her as she was meant to be seen. "Do you like it?" Lily asked with the anxiety of an artist awaiting judgment. "I love it more than I can possibly tell you," Eleanor said, pulling her granddaughter close. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever been given." And she meant it. More beautiful than the expensive jewelry Madison had coveted. More meaningful than the practical gifts she'd received when her family saw her as a service provider rather than a person. This drawing showed her as Lily saw her, not as decoration, but as the heart of the family, the center around which they all revolved. Walter cleared his throat gently. "Speaking of gifts," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor of nervousness, "Eleanor and I have an announcement to make." Eleanor felt her heart flutter with anticipation. They'd discussed this moment, planned for it, but actually saying the words aloud felt momentous. "Walter asked me to marry him," Eleanor said, her voice clear and strong. "And I said yes." The room erupted in congratulations and surprised laughter. Sarah was the first to reach her, enveloping Eleanor in a fierce hug. "Mom, I'm so happy for you," she whispered, and Eleanor could hear tears in her daughter's voice. Happy tears. David shook Walter's hand with new respect and warmth. "Welcome to the family," he said, and Eleanor heard an echo of his father's voice in the formal courtesy. Marcus grinned and clapped Walter on the shoulder. "You're getting a hell of a woman," he said, with characteristic directness. "But I guess you already know that." "That I do," Walter replied, his arm slipping around Eleanor's waist with easy affection. "When's the wedding?" James asked practically, already pulling out his phone to check his calendar. "Spring," Eleanor said. "Nothing elaborate. Just family. And close friends." She paused, looking around the room at these people who had stood by her, who had shown her what real love looked like. "And afterward, Walter and I are planning to travel. We want to see Europe, maybe take a Mediterranean cruise." "Mom, that's wonderful," Sarah said, and Eleanor could see that she meant it. There was no concern about being left behind, no worry about who would take care of whom. Sarah understood that her mother's happiness was its own gift to the family. As the morning progressed into afternoon, Eleanor moved through her house with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The family gathered around the dining table for Christmas dinner, but the dynamic was completely transformed from the previous year. Conversations flowed naturally, without the undercurrent of tension that had marked every family gathering when Madison was present. David actually laughed, a real unself-conscious laugh, at one of Marcus's stories about a difficult client. Sarah and James seemed relaxed, their children happy and well-behaved. Most remarkably, Eleanor found herself at the center of these conversations not as someone struggling to maintain relevance, but as someone whose opinions were valued, whose stories were welcomed, whose presence enhanced rather than burdened the gathering. After dinner, as the family settled in the living room with coffee and dessert, Walter stood and tapped his spoon against his wine glass. "If I may," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "I want to say something about the woman who has agreed to become my wife." Eleanor felt herself blush, but she didn't try to deflect attention as she might have in the past. She sat quietly, ready to receive whatever Walter wanted to say. "I met Eleanor at a difficult time in both our lives," Walter continued. "We were both learning how to rebuild after loss. But what struck me about Eleanor wasn't her vulnerability. It was her strength, her determination to not just survive, but to thrive, to demand better for herself and from the people around her." He looked directly at Eleanor, and she saw deep affection in his eyes. "Eleanor taught me that it's never too late to insist on being treated with dignity, to refuse to accept less than we deserve. She showed me what it looks like to choose love over fear, respect over convenience." Eleanor felt tears threaten again, but she blinked them back. This wasn't a moment for weeping but for celebration. "To Eleanor," Walter raised his glass, "the queen of her own life." "To Eleanor," the family chorused, raising their glasses in unison. As the evening wound down and the family began to gather their things to leave, Eleanor stood in her doorway, saying goodbye to each person individually. These weren't the hurried, obligation-fulfilling farewells of previous years, but genuine expressions of love and anticipation for the next gathering. David lingered last, Lily already buckled into her car seat but chatting happily with her cousins through the window. "Mom," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Eleanor waited, giving him space to find his words. "I failed you," he said simply. "For years I failed to protect you, to stand up for you, to see what was happening right in front of me. I was a coward, and I let my wife treat you terribly because it was easier than confronting the problem." Eleanor started to speak, but David held up his hand. "Let me finish. Losing Madison was painful, but losing the illusion that I was a good son was worse. These past months, learning to be the man Dad would have wanted me to be, learning to put my family, my real family, first, it's been the most important work of my life." Eleanor reached out and touched her son's cheek, feeling the slight roughness of 5 o'clock shadow, remembering when she used to do the same thing when he was small and had scraped his knee or hurt his feelings. "You didn't lose anything, sweetheart," she said gently. "You found yourself. And that's all any parent really wants, to see their children become who they're meant to be." David nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you, Mom, not because of what you give me or do for me, but because of who you are. I should have told you that a long time ago." "You're telling me now," Eleanor said. "That's what matters." After David and Lily drove away, Eleanor and Walter stood together in the doorway, watching the taillights disappear down the tree-lined street. The December air was crisp and clean, filled with the promise of snow. "That went well," Walter said mildly, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. Eleanor laughed, leaning into his warmth. "Better than well. It was perfect." "Any regrets?" he asked. And she knew he was thinking about Madison's absence, about the choice Eleanor had made that had changed everything. Eleanor considered the question seriously. Did she regret the pain her decision had caused? The division in the family? The difficult conversations and legal complications? "No," she said finally. "No regrets. Madison made her choice, and I made mine. I chose dignity. I chose respect. I chose to surround myself with people who see me as more than decoration." Fast. She looked up at Walter, this man who had appeared in her life when she least expected it but most needed it. "I chose love that doesn't come with conditions or expectations, love that celebrates rather than diminishes." Walter kissed the top of her head, a gesture both tender and respectful. And what a choice it was! As they turned to go back inside, Eleanor caught sight of Lily's drawing, now prominently displayed on the mantelpiece. The little girl had drawn her wearing a crown, yes, but more importantly, she had drawn her smiling. Not the practiced, people-pleasing smile Eleanor had perfected over the years, but a genuine expression of joy. Eleanor Hartwell, at 73, had learned the most important lesson of her life. She had never been decoration. She had always been the queen. It had just taken her a while to claim her throne. The house settled around them as Walter banked the fire and Eleanor turned off the Christmas tree lights. But the warmth that filled the space wasn't dependent on external sources. It came from within, from a woman who had finally learned the difference between being needed and being valued, between being useful and being loved. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new joys. But tonight, Eleanor Hartwell was exactly where she belonged, in a home filled with authentic love, surrounded by people who cherished her, not for what she provided, but for who she was. She was no longer just decoration in her own life, she was the masterpiece. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.